The Aztec Empire rose and vanished in barely 2 centuries, a brief flare of brilliance and brutality that left a mark on the world as unforgettable as the crimson stains on their temple stones. They called themselves the Mexica, and they believed that life itself was borrowed from the gods, a debt repaid only through blood. But theirs was not a world of mere savagery. It was a world of astonishing beauty, discipline, and cosmic poetry. Imagine standing in Tenochtitlan, a city of glittering canals, floating gardens, and towering pyramids piercing the clouds. Beneath the surface of this order lay a paradox, a people who could carve human hearts from living bodies in daylight, then return home at dusk to write songs about love, flowers, and the stars. To understand the Aztecs is to walk the thin line between devotion and darkness, between ecstasy and agony. Before diving into these forgotten stories of survival and suffering, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please, comment below to let me know where you're listening from. Historians often describe the Aztecs as warriors obsessed with conquest and sacrifice, but this is only half of the story. In truth, their society was built on balance, every cruelty paired with compassion, every law with ritual, every punishment with purpose. Their empire, born in the 14th century on the swampy island of Lake Texcoco, was a marvel of order and faith. In the heart of that empire, the gods demanded not only hearts, but harmony. Even in the sphere of desire, the Aztecs believed that love and lust had to serve the cosmic balance. To them, sex was not a private indulgence, but a sacred act, one that could either nourish the world or doom it. It was both worship and danger, pleasure and peril. Every heartbeat, every whisper of longing, every act of union echoed through the universe, keeping the sun alive for one more day. Their laws were severe, their ceremonies precise. The human body was sacred, but so was discipline. From the youngest age, children were taught that the flesh was both a gift and a trap. They learned through song, story, and fear that their bodies could bring harmony or unleash chaos. It was a belief so deeply woven into their culture that even laughter, love, and death were parts of the same divine rhythm. To outsiders, especially the Spanish chroniclers who first arrived in the 16th century, Aztec life seemed monstrous. Yet beneath the terror was a strange tenderness. Women could inherit property, poets were honored like priests, and even execution, however brutal, was wrapped in ceremony and meaning. The Aztecs did not see cruelty, they saw order, a universe that required both blooming and bleeding to survive. From their temples to their marketplaces, from the battlefield to the bedroom, everything in Aztec life revolved around this sacred equilibrium. Flowers, symbols of fleeting beauty, were as vital to them as blades and blood. They adorned warriors and brides alike, embodying both love and death. To the Aztecs, the flower was the soul's heartbeat, fragile, fragrant, and destined to fade. And so, as we begin this descent into the intimate and often unsettling corners of Aztec life, remember this: theirs was not a civilization of monsters, but of believers, people who saw the divine in both agony and affection. Every ritual, every punishment, every kiss under their burning sun carried the weight of eternity. because in their world, to live was to serve the gods, to love was to risk destruction, and to desire was to dance on the edge of the sacred and the damned. In the Aztec world, power was never simply masculine or feminine, it was dual. Every man had his divine counterpart, every woman her mirror in the heavens. The universe, they believed, was sustained by this balance. Without women, the sun would lose its strength and the world itself would collapse. In Tenochtitlan, women were not confined to silence or shadow. They were the rhythm of daily life, the weavers, midwives, healers, and teachers who kept the empire breathing. A woman could own land, manage her household, and even engage in trade. In the busy markets, it was often women who set the prices, their voices rising over the sound of drums and vendors shouting for cacao beans and woven cloth. But their equality was not born of modern ideals. It was spiritual. The Aztecs saw women as the living symbols of fertility and endurance, as essential to cosmic order as warriors were. To give birth was to fight on the battlefield of life itself. A woman who died in childbirth was not mourned, she was celebrated, her soul rising to join the sun at dawn alongside falling warriors. To die bringing life was the female equivalent of dying for the gods. Among the living, older women commanded deep respect. They were the wise ones, matchmakers, mediators, and keepers of social harmony. When marriage was to be arranged, they were the ones who carried the weight of diplomacy. They would visit the bride's home, bearing gifts and poetry, reciting the virtues of the groom and his lineage. Their words were as binding as law, for in Aztec society, words could build or destroy worlds. Once an agreement was reached, these same women would carry the bride on their backs to her new home, a symbolic act showing that she was being carried from her childhood into womanhood, from one family to another. There, before the gods and gathered kin, the cloaks of the bride and groom were tied together, not by a priest, but by the elders, for marriage was a social duty, not merely a personal bond. And yet, even this union, sacred and solemn, was not a guarantee of happiness. The Aztecs believed that harmony between man and woman had to be maintained through discipline and ritual, not emotion alone. A woman's loyalty and a man's restraint were offerings to the gods. If the husband was a warrior, his wife was the quiet pillar that steadied his hand. If she faltered, he fell. If he sinned, the heavens trembled. To modernize, this might seem harsh. Love, regulated by fear, faith, and fatalism. But to the Aztecs, it was divine symmetry. In their minds, the gods themselves lived by similar rules. Every deity had both male and female aspects. Even the war god Huitzilopochtli owed his power to his mother, Kotlikwi, the serpent-skirted goddess of life and death. This was not equality in the modern sense. It was cosmic balance. The masculine and feminine were never at war. They were threads in the same divine fabric. Men shed blood on the battlefield. Women shed blood in childbirth. Both were sacred sacrifices. Both fed the gods. And so, while the Aztec warrior was celebrated for courage and conquest, the woman was honored for endurance and creation. Together, they upheld the rhythm of the universe, a rhythm written in blood, sweat, and whispered prayers beneath the glow of temple fires. In this world, love was duty, and duty was worship. The cradle and the sword, the loom and the spear, all belonged to the same divine order. It was a society where even tenderness bore the weight of eternity. Marriage in the Aztec world was not simply a union of two hearts. It was the joining of two destinies, overseen by the gods and sealed in ritual. Every marriage was a reenactment of cosmic creation, a reflection of the divine partnership that held the heavens and the earth together. It was not love that made a marriage sacred, but balance, the harmony of opposites woven through fire, prayer, and patience. The process began long before the wedding itself. Once the elders had arranged the match and the families agreed, astrologers consulted the sacred calendar, the Tonalpuwali, to determine the most auspicious day. In a civilization where every day carried divine meaning, even the wrong date could curse a union. A good day promised fertility, fortune, and the favor of the gods. A bad one foretold sorrow and separation. When the chosen day arrived, the bride was bathed, perfumed with copal incense, and dressed in a richly woven white robe, her face painted in red and yellow, the colors of dawn and rebirth. Her hair was bound high, symbolizing the lifting of her spirit toward the gods. The groom, likewise, was purified with incense and prayers, wearing a new cloak embroidered with symbolic patterns of strength and devotion. As dusk fell, the bride was carried on the back of the matchmaker, an older woman who represented both guidance and continuity. It was said that she carried not just the bride, but generations of ancestral spirits, whispering blessings for the path ahead. When they reached the groom's home, the two families gathered around the household hearth, the heart of every Aztec dwelling. There, before the fire that represented the sun itself, the matchmaker tied the corner of the groom's cloak to that of the bride. This simple knot was more than symbolic. It was a binding witnessed by gods and ancestors alike. No priest officiated, for the ceremony belonged to the people and to the cosmic order that governed all things. From that moment, their lives were intertwined in duty, faith, and the endless cycle of giving and sacrifice. Yet the union did not begin with celebration. Instead, the newlyweds entered a period of silence and prayer. For 4 long days they remained in seclusion within their chamber, fasting, praying, and lighting aromatic resins on the family altar at noon and midnight. The scent of burning copal filled the air as they asked the gods for wisdom, patience, and strength. Only on the 5th day after these rituals of purification were they permitted to consummate their marriage. This discipline, so foreign to modern minds, reflected a profound truth in Aztec thought, that pleasure must follow purity. Love, untempered by restraint, was seen as dangerous, capable of unbalancing both body and cosmos. In holding back, they honored the gods who governed creation itself, for restraint was a form of offering. For many, this period of silence was not merely an ordeal, but a test of character. It revealed whether the union had been blessed by the divine or merely born of human desire. Those who endured faithfully were believed to be aligned with the sacred rhythms of the universe. But this devotion came with weight. Marriage was a social contract, a religious duty, and a spiritual battlefield. A husband was expected to provide, protect, and honor his wife, but also to serve the gods through his labor and bravery. A wife was to manage the household, weave the family's garments, and raise children in the ways of discipline and faith. Their partnership was not just for love, but for the preservation of cosmic balance. Divorce was rare, though not impossible. If a marriage proved cursed or unbearable, it could be dissolved before elders after many rituals of reconciliation. Yet separation carried a stain, not of sin, but of imbalance. To part ways was to admit that the harmony once promised had fractured beyond repair. In every home, the family hearth burned as the eternal symbol of unity. It was here that incense was offered daily, prayers whispered to the ancestors, and children taught the laws of humility and obedience. The flame that tied man and woman in the beginning was kept alive not by passion, but by duty. The steady, unending kind that defied time and suffering. For the Aztecs, love was never free from the divine gaze. It was watched, measured, and judged, not by emotion, but by order. And yet, within that framework of rules and rituals, something deeply human survived. Tenderness. The way a husband would offer flowers to his wife, or how a woman would weave his cloak with protective symbols before he marched to war. They loved in the only way their gods allowed, through discipline, devotion, and a quiet, enduring faith that their union was part of something eternal. In the empire of the Aztecs, love was not a private affair. It was a matter of law, faith, and order. Every embrace, every betrayal was judged not by emotion, but by cosmic principle. To desire recklessly was to disturb the delicate balance that held the world together. To betray one's vows was to challenge the gods themselves. Marriage was sacred, but it did not forbid men from taking concubines. In a world governed by hierarchy, only those of status, the rulers, nobles, and accomplished warriors, could afford such privilege. Yet even this indulgence had boundaries drawn by divine law. A man could take as many concubines as he could feed and clothe, but each was to be treated with dignity, never as a mere possession. The children born of these unions were accepted as members of the household, though they could not inherit property unless formally recognized. The Aztecs' understanding of love was neither romantic nor careless. It was bound by discipline and the fear of divine retribution. They saw passion as a sacred flame. It could warm the home or burn the world. This duality ran through every layer of their lives, from their legends to their laws. But among all sins, adultery was considered the most dangerous. To break marital fidelity was not just to betray a spouse, it was to wound the order of the cosmos. In the eyes of the gods, such acts unleashed chaos, and chaos demanded blood. The punishments were as severe as they were symbolic. A man caught in the act of adultery faced death by stoning, his skull crushed to restore balance. The woman was first strangled, then her head pierced, a double death meant to erase her impurity both in body and spirit. But the law demanded proof. The husband could not simply accuse. Witnesses were required. Words alone carried no weight when life and death hung in the balance. And if, in a moment of jealous rage, a husband killed his wife upon discovering her betrayal, the law turned upon him as well. His crime was no less grave than hers. Even vengeance was subject to divine order. Justice, to the Aztecs, was not vengeance at all. It was correction, the restoration of equilibrium. No one, not even the nobility, was spared. Kings, priests, and nobles fell to the same blade when found guilty. The gods, the Aztecs believed, cared little for status. They cared for balance. Among the chronicles left by Spanish friars, one story stands out as both horrific and revealing. It tells of an Aztec princess, a wife of Nezahualpi, ruler of Texcoco, a man celebrated for wisdom and fairness. The princess was beautiful, clever, and cruel. When she desired a man, she lured him into her chambers with promises of love. But once satisfied, she would order his death, having a statue sculpted in his likeness to deceive her husband. When the truth emerged, she was found in bed with 3 lovers, surrounded by their carved effigies. Her punishment was swift and absolute. Public execution, along with her accomplices and the servants who aided her deceit. It was not simply a spectacle of death, it was theater, meant to remind the empire that even beauty must bow to law. The princess's execution was a warning sung in every marketplace. The gods see everything. In this society, desire could be divine or destructive. Love was exalted, but lust was feared, for it weakened the will, the very force that held the Aztec universe upright. To indulge without restraint was to dishonor Quetzalcoatl, the god of wisdom and self-control. To betray one's vows was to side with Tezcatlipoca, the trickster who thrived in chaos and deceit. For the Aztecs, moral law and cosmic law were one and the same. Every act of pleasure, every secret sin echoed in the heavens. Their punishments were cruel not because they delighted in pain, but because they believed the world itself could unravel if justice faltered. And yet, beneath this fear, there was still humanity, a tenderness hidden in silence. Many husbands forgave, many wives endured, not out of love alone, but out of shared reverence for the divine order that governed them both. They lived their entire lives beneath the weight of invisible eyes, the gods who measured their every desire. In the end, the Aztecs did not fear love. They feared imbalance. To love was to walk upon sacred ground, knowing that one misstep could shake the heavens. To the Aztecs, the human body was both sacred vessel and dangerous weapon, capable of giving life or unleashing the very chaos the gods fought to contain. Nothing revealed this fragile balance more than their view of the forbidden, those who defied nature's roles or inverted the cosmic order of male and female. Homosexuality, in their eyes, was not a private matter of affection or preference. It was a cosmic violation. The Aztecs believed that every being was born under the gaze of dual gods, one masculine, one feminine. To blur the lines between them was to offend the architecture of the universe. The gods themselves had fought and died to establish order, and any human act that defied this divine design threatened to undo it. Punishments were merciless. Men found guilty of such acts faced death. The methods varied, all symbolic, all brutal. Some were hanged, others stabbed, and some, according to the darkest accounts, were eviscerated, their intestines pulled through their bodies as an offering to the gods they had offended. For women, death came swiftly, strangulation, the silencing of a voice that had strayed beyond the order of the world. To modern sensibilities, such cruelty feels unthinkable, but to the Aztecs, these acts were not punishments of hatred. They were sacrifices to heal the wound inflicted upon the balance of things. Their world was woven together by ritual and belief, by the conviction that the cosmos was perpetually fragile. The sun itself was thought to rise only because the gods demanded human hearts to fuel it. If sex, a divine act of creation, was perverted, then creation itself could falter. The anthropologist Mariana Arregui once described this worldview as cosmic anxiety, the fear that any disruption in moral order might invite catastrophe. For the Aztecs, that catastrophe was not metaphorical. To them, droughts, eclipses, and plagues were the screams of a universe out of tune. Every deviation, even in desire, echoed across the heavens. And so, the temple priests, robed in black and crimson, believed that the agony of the condemned restored purity. They saw death not as vengeance, but as medicine. The spilling of blood was a cleansing act, one that allowed the balance of the universe to breathe again. Yet even amid this rigid moral structure, there were contradictions. Their own myths often portrayed the gods as complex, imperfect, and sometimes transgressive. The deity Xochipilli, the flower prince, god of beauty, dance, and art, was also the patron of homosexual love, a protector of sensual pleasure. His shrine celebrated music, flowers, and eroticism. It was as if the Aztecs, even while condemning deviation, still recognized that desire itself was divine, too vast to fully control, too sacred to erase. This paradox, divine freedom versus human restraint, haunted every corner of their civilization. On one hand, they celebrated fertility and pleasure through festivals where wine, song, and erotic dances filled the air. On the other, they executed those whose passions strayed beyond the boundaries of custom. It was as though the Aztecs were forever wrestling with their own reflection, torn between worshiping desire and fearing it. In this tension lay the soul of their empire, order built upon chaos, beauty born from terror. They believed that only by confronting darkness could they preserve light. Every forbidden act became a mirror in which they saw their own fragility, a reminder that even the gods could be undone by temptation. It is easy to call them cruel, yet to understand the Aztecs is to recognize their devotion, not to pleasure or pain, but to balance. To them, morality was not about right or wrong, but about harmony and decay. To disrupt that harmony was to endanger all creation. In this way, their punishments were not only social, but cosmic, rituals meant to protect the stars themselves from falling. And in the flickering torchlight of their temples, as prayers rose with the scent of burning copal and the cries of the condemned echoed through the stone corridors, the Aztecs believed they were not killing sinners, they were saving the world. In the heart of Aztec mythology, there lived a god both revered and feared, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. He was the breath of wind and wisdom, the creator who sculpted mankind from the bones of ancient worlds. But among his many legends, one stands apart for its strangeness, its audacity. The tale of how life itself began from an act of divine solitude. It is said that Quetzalcoatl once stood alone at the edge of creation, gazing upon the barren earth. The world had form, but no pulse. Mountains rose in silence, rivers flowed without purpose, and the air hung heavy with stillness. In that emptiness, the god turned inward. he touched himself, and from his divine seed upon a stone was born a creature unlike any other, a bat. That bat, restless and wild, flew through the night and found the goddess Chokchiquetzal, deity of beauty, love, and fertility. It bit her gently upon her most sacred place, and from the wound flowers blossomed, vivid, perfumed, eternal. The bat gathered these blossoms and carried them to the underworld, to Mictlantecutli, the lord of death, who perfumed them with darkness and sent them back to the living. Thus, the Aztecs said, flowers, symbols of both life and mortality, came into being. It was a myth not of shame, but of creation, an acknowledgement that even the gods' most intimate acts could shape the world. Pleasure, in divine hands, was generative. It was only in mortal hands that it could become dangerous. For mortals, the line between creation and corruption was perilously thin. To indulge without purpose was to mimic the gods without their wisdom. To act without reverence was to turn sacred energy into chaos. That is why the Aztecs regarded self-satisfaction among men with such ambivalence, at once divine and forbidden. Among the youth, especially boys coming of age, such acts were considered a grave moral weakness. It was said that when a young man gave in to his urges, he was not merely sinning, he was wasting the fire meant to sustain the cosmos. To waste seed was to starve the gods of creation's essence. It was the theft of sacred energy, an act that risked spiritual rot. Punishments for such transgressions were harsh, symbolic, and humiliating. Some chroniclers tell that the offending boy's genitals would be smeared with ground chili peppers, not out of cruelty, but to sear the memory into his flesh. It was both pain and lesson, a purification through fire. Others were made to inhale the smoke of burning peppers until their eyes watered and their lungs burned. The message was always the same. Discipline is divine. Modern historians debate whether such punishments were real or exaggerated by Spanish chroniclers eager to paint the Aztecs as barbaric. Yet, even if the details blurred in translation, the underlying truth remained. Restraint was sacred. The Aztecs did not fear desire itself. They feared its imbalance, its potential to unravel the harmony their gods had bled to create. For them, the body was a temple of the sun, and the seed of life was a spark of cosmic energy. It was not to be wasted in solitude, but to be offered within the sacred bounds of union, or to the gods through sacrifice. To act outside that order was to mock creation itself. And so, while Quetzalcoatl could birth the bat and flowers from his divine solitude, mortals were reminded that they were not gods. Their pleasures had to be contained, their impulses shaped into offerings of discipline, prayer, and devotion. To the Aztecs, every act of restraint was a way of echoing the gods, of proving that they too could hold the universe steady within their hearts. Because the greatest act of creation, they believed, was not born from indulgence, but from mastery. Not from fire itself, but from the hand that dares to hold it without being consumed. If there was one thing every Aztec child learned early, it was that life was not meant to be easy. Discipline was the foundation of virtue. not a punishment, but a sacred act of preparation. The gods demanded strong hearts and steady minds, and the parents, in turn, shaped their children like obsidian blades through pain, patience, and ritual. From the moment they could walk, boys and girls were taught that obedience was a form of worship. To disobey was not merely a childish mistake. It was a small fracture in the cosmic order. Mothers and fathers, both respected teachers in the home, took their duty seriously. Every household was a school of moral endurance, every hearth a temple of discipline. For minor offenses, laziness, greed, disobedience, parents would scold their children with words that carried both warning and love. But for greater misdeeds, the lessons became physical, vivid, unforgettable. Some were pricked with magoey thorns, others made to inhale the thick smoke of burning chili peppers. It was said that the heat of the pepper cleansed not only the lungs, but the spirit. Imagine a small boy caught stealing maize from the family stores. His mother grips his arm, her voice trembling between anger and sorrow. Outside, she burns a handful of chilies on the fire. Smoke rises, acrid and choking, filling the hut. The boy coughs, his eyes flood with tears. She says nothing, for the punishment itself is the lesson. When the air clears, she gathers him close and whispers, "You must remember, the gods watch everything." This was not cruelty. It was faith in action. The Aztecs believed that pain was a teacher, a sacred flame that burned away weakness. Children who endured learned to master themselves, to face the hardships of adulthood with dignity. The discipline of the home mirrored the discipline of the cosmos. The same fire that punished could also purify. In Telpochcali, the house of youth, where boys were trained for war and civic life, this lesson continued. There, young men rose before dawn, bathed in cold water, and swept temple courtyards until sunrise. They carried wood for the priests, hauled stones for construction, and spent long nights listening to tales of the gods' sacrifices. Every hardship was a rehearsal for service, for the belief that the gods had suffered far more for humanity's existence. Girls, trained at home or in Cuicacali, the house of song, learned weaving, household management, and ritual purity. They were taught that patience and diligence were forms of prayer. To keep the home in order was to maintain the world's rhythm. To weave a perfect cloth was to mirror the divine artistry of creation. Punishment to them was not shame, it was guidance. There was no concept of spoiling a child with kindness. Love was expressed through correction, through the shaping of spirit. The Aztecs believed that unchecked emotion was dangerous, a seed of imbalance that could grow into pride or sin. To discipline a child was to protect not only the family, but the entire community from spiritual decay. This worldview extended beyond the household. In the temples, priests taught that all humanity owed the gods a debt of obedience, humility, and self-control. To live without restraint was to forget the sacred blood spilled by the gods themselves. The child's tears before a chili fire echoed the same suffering the gods endured to create the world. Such ideas may seem harsh, yet within them lay a profound reverence for order. The Aztecs did not see discipline as domination, but as harmony, a fire to forge the soul. They knew that from pain, beauty could emerge. From struggle, strength could blossom. And so, in homes across the empire, the scent of burning peppers was both warning and prayer. The smoke rising to the heavens as a quiet promise that each new generation would learn the sacred art of endurance. The child wept, the mother prayed, and the gods, it was said, smiled through the smoke. In the glittering chaos of Tenochtitlan, not all women were wives or mothers. Some walked another path, one lined with perfume, paint, and paradox. They were the Ahuinime, the bringers of joy. To the Spanish chroniclers, they were prostitutes. To the Aztecs, they were something far more complex. Women who stood between sin and sanctity, pleasure and piety. The Aztecs' world was steeped in dualities. Day and night, life and death, purity and desire. All coexisted, each giving meaning to the other. Prostitution, then, was not simply tolerated. It was understood as part of the cosmic balance. The Ahuinime were both condemned and revered, their bodies serving as instruments of comfort, celebration, and sometimes divine ritual. The young girls of noble homes were warned against becoming like them. Mothers taught their daughters not to paint their faces or chew gum in public, for such gestures marked one as a woman of pleasure. Respectable women wore their hair neatly tied, their modesty woven into their clothing. But the Ahuinime were known for their loosened hair, painted cheeks, and crimson-stained lips. They walked boldly through the markets, perfumed and confident, as if daring the gods to look away. Their existence was not hidden. In the busy markets, where gold, feathers, and cacao beans changed hands, they too offered what was valued: joy, release, the illusion of love. And yet, many among them were not free. Some were born into poverty or fate, their destiny foretold by the calendar. A girl born under certain signs, it was said, was destined either for artistic skill or for prostitution. Her life's path written in the stars before her first breath. But not all Ahuinime were victims of destiny. They held status that confounded outsiders. A few were priestesses of Xochiquetzal, the goddess of beauty, love, and fertility, the very embodiment of desire itself. These sacred courtesans served the temple, offering not sin, but solace. Their role was to absorb the desires of men returning from war, to heal their souls through touch and song before they face the gods in prayer. In some rituals, their beauty was not a distraction, but a form of worship. Warriors who had shown extraordinary valor were sometimes rewarded not with gold or land, but with a night in the temple of Xochiquetzal, a night of music, incense, and embrace, believed to renew their spirit. To the Aztecs, this was not indulgence, but sacred balance, the soul refreshed so it could again bear the burdens of war and sacrifice. And yet, beyond the temple walls, the line between sacred and profane blurred. Many Ahuinime lived ordinary lives, entertaining merchants, soldiers, and nobles.
They were educated in conversation, music, and the art of pleasing. Their laughter filled taverns and alleys alike, a fragile echo of comfort in a world obsessed with death. But society judged them harshly. Respectable women avoided their gaze, and mothers invoked their image as warnings to daughters. Still, there lingered quiet envy. The Ahuianime were free in ways others were not, free to speak, to laugh, to touch, to live beyond the narrow path of duty. They carried both the curse of temptation and the power of choice. Even in shame, they were necessary. The Aztecs believed that desire, when denied entirely, could poison the soul. Thus, the Ahuianime were paradoxical healers, restoring harmony where abstinence bred imbalance. Their work, though stigmatized, was woven into the fabric of Aztec life, a human offering to the restless gods of pleasure and pain. Some even found their way into history. There are tales of women who, through their wit and beauty, gained influence among warriors and priests, shaping decisions from the shadows. One chronicle tells of a courtesan who warned a nobleman of an impending betrayal, saving his life at the cost of her own. When she died, her body was laid with flowers, and men whispered prayers to Xochiquetzal in her name. The Ahuianime existed on the threshold, neither fully condemned nor fully accepted, living symbols of humanity's most ancient paradox. They reminded the Aztecs that, even in a world ruled by sacrifice and fear, pleasure was still divine. And so, under the burning sun and the shadow of pyramids, they danced, painted, perfumed, and unashamed, as if the gods themselves had breathed them into being for the sole purpose of teaching mortals that joy, too, could be sacred.
In the Aztec imagination, pleasure and prayer were not opposites. They were intertwined threads in the same cosmic fabric. The body, like the temple, was a vessel for divine energy, and nowhere was this belief more vividly expressed than in the lives of those who served both men and gods, the temple courtesans, the sacred Awanimai who walked the border between holiness and sin. During the grand festivals that illuminated Tenochtitlan, these women were not hidden or shamed. They danced in public rituals beneath the towering pyramids, surrounded by warriors, priests, and the flicker of 1,000 torches. To the foreign eyes of the Spanish friars, such ceremonies seemed indecent, but to the Aztecs, they were expressions of cosmic balance, a way to honor both fertility and mortality. At the festivals of Tonacatacutli, the lord of sustenance, and Huitzilopochtli, the god of the sun and war, young warriors would circle the Awenimai, their bodies painted in blue and ochre, their hearts pounding with music and desire. The women, adorned with flowers and shells, would sing and move in rhythm, representing the eternal dance of life and death, the sun's pursuit of the moon, the earth's hunger for rain. Their dance was not meant to arouse alone, it was meant to remind. Every motion carried a story, every step a symbol. When the Awanimai lifted their arms, they were invoking fertility. When they bowed, they were surrendering to death. The line between worship and seduction dissolved, and what remained was pure energy, the kind that nourished both gods and men. There was a time each year, during the onset of the rainy season, when prostitutes, midwives, and healers would engage in mock battles. They fought not with weapons, but with laughter and flowers, hurling petals and herbs at one another. To the onlookers, it was joyous chaos. To the priests, it was sacred drama. The combat symbolized the meeting of life and death, the promise of rebirth through the struggle of the body. Ross Hassig, a modern anthropologist, wrote that prostitution in Aztec society was rarely a choice of mere survival. Often it was destiny, inscribed in the sacred calendar. A girl born on certain days, such as Kali or Xochitl, was fated either for artistry or sensual service. Her role in life was predetermined by divine rhythm, as if even her sins had been chosen for her. To the Aztecs, nothing happened by accident. Thus, the Auenimai were at once objects of scorn and of awe. They were seen as embodiments of the goddess Xochiquetzal, the divine flower whose beauty invited both creation and destruction. It was said that her priestesses were chosen from among the most graceful and beautiful women, their bodies considered temples through which the goddess herself moved. Their service to men was an echo of her eternal generosity, the giving of pleasure to restore balance to a world that fed on sorrow. But this divinity carried its price. A woman chosen for such sacred duty was both exalted and doomed. For once her beauty faded, she was cast aside, stripped of her sacred adornments, replaced by another vessel of youth and grace. In a world obsessed with cycles, her fall from favor was seen not as cruelty, but as natural order. The flower that bloomed, withered, and returned to the soil to nourish the next. Outside the temple walls, not all Auenimai were granted this divine status. Many lived in small huts near the markets or in districts known for music and revelry. They sold their art as well as their bodies, singing, dancing, telling stories to weary merchants and soldiers. For some, their laughter was a mask against despair. For others, it was the only freedom they would ever know. Yet even in these shadows they served a purpose. The Aztecs saw them as necessary forces, reminders that pleasure and pain, purity and corruption were inseparable. Without the profane, the sacred could not exist. Without sin, virtue had no meaning. In their painted faces and perfumed hair, the Aztecs saw reflections of their gods, beings of contradiction, both beautiful and terrible. The same goddess who blessed lovers with passion also demanded sacrifices in her honor. The same flower that symbolized fertility could adorn the corpse of the sacrificed. In this paradox, the Aztecs found truth. Life was not meant to be divided between holiness and sin, but lived as a single act of devotion, a dance between creation and decay. And as the night faded and the temple fires dimmed, the Auenimai vanished into the streets, leaving behind the scent of flowers and smoke, the lingering memory of a civilization that dared to see divinity in desire and holiness in the fleeting touch of human hands.
To the Aztecs, destiny was not a mystery. It was written in the heavens, in the intricate patterns of the stars, in the rhythm of the sacred calendar, in the invisible threads connecting birth and fate. They called it the Tonal Powali, the count of days, a cosmic map that guided every human life from cradle to grave. Each child entered the world beneath the watchful gaze of gods. The moment of birth determined not just one's temperament, but one's purpose, strengths, and inevitable trials. A priest trained in astrology would examine the day sign and number of birth, consulting ancient codices filled with painted symbols, jaguars, flowers, reeds, houses, each carrying divine meaning. From these omens, the priest declared the newborn's fate. If the stars were kind, the child might be destined for greatness, a warrior, a poet, or a priest. But if the alignment was poor, the future darkened. Some were born beneath signs of poverty or misfortune. Others were marked for slavery or for a life of service that the gods demanded, not society. There was no rebellion against this fate. The Aztecs did not see destiny as imprisonment, but as order, the divine plan that kept the universe in harmony. Among the women of Tenochtitlan, few fates were as misunderstood as those marked by the sign of Xochitl, the flower. A girl born under this symbol was said to carry beauty and artistry in her soul, but also temptation. She might become a skilled weaver, a musician, or a courtesan. Whether she rose to glory or fell into disgrace depended not on choice, but on how she fulfilled the balance set by the gods. Another fateful sign was Kali, the house, a symbol of rest and enclosure. Girls born under this sign were said to face a life of hardship or idleness, often falling into slavery or prostitution. To be born Kali was to be trapped between two worlds, neither blessed nor cursed, but perpetually tested. The Aztecs accepted this as the will of the heavens. Even sin, they believed, had its purpose in the great pattern. Parents did not curse fate. Instead, they prayed that their children would serve the gods well, regardless of what destiny had decreed. They raised them to understand that fulfillment lay not in resisting one's path, but in walking it with dignity. The warrior's sword, the weaver's thread, the prostitute's perfume, all were threads in the same divine tapestry. In this belief, there was no randomness, no injustice, only necessity. The universe was a grand equation, and every human soul was both sacrifice and balance. It is difficult for modern minds to grasp such fatalism. We see freedom as a virtue. The Aztecs saw it as danger. Freedom meant disobedience to the order of the gods, an act that could unravel creation itself. To know one's place, to live it without pride or despair, was the highest form of wisdom. Yet even within this predestined system, the Aztecs found beauty. Their poets often wrote of fate as a flower, fragile, inevitable, yet fragrant while it lasted. One verse, preserved through the Spanish chronicles, whispers, "We are flowers born for the gods, blooming for a moment in their sight, and when we fade, they remember our fragrance." These words capture the heart of Aztec spirituality: acceptance without surrender, devotion without complaint. Even those born into suffering could achieve honor through faith and endurance. To live with purpose, however small, was to give meaning to existence. Thus, the woman born under Xochitl, who became a courtesan, was no outcast in the cosmic sense. She was fulfilling her divine pattern. The man born under Tecpat, the flint blade, who lived and died in war, was not merely a soldier, but a reflection of the gods' own struggle to keep the sun alive. Every life, no matter how lowly or exalted, was sacred because it was necessary. Every death, even one drenched in blood upon the altar, was an offering to keep the universe in motion. This was the quiet dignity of the Aztecs, their ability to see purpose in pain, to find peace in inevitability. They believed the stars did not control them out of cruelty, but out of compassion. For without the order of destiny, the sun would fall, the rain would cease, and the gods themselves would grow hungry. And so every birth was a covenant with the cosmos, every breath a whisper of obedience. In a world where even the stars demanded sacrifice, to live was to serve, and to serve was to shine.
In the Aztec world, beauty was a double-edged blessing. The more radiant the face, the more dangerous the fate. For beauty was not meant for indulgence, it was meant for offering. And nowhere did that belief take a more haunting form than in the festival of Toxcat, the ceremony of the sacrificial lover. Each year, the priests of Huitzilopochtli, the sun god and lord of war, would select one captive from the ranks of the empire's enemies. But not just any captive, he had to be flawless. Tall, strong, and handsome, with a body unmarked by wounds or scars. For a single year, he would live as a god on earth, the mortal image of Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror, the trickster deity of beauty, destiny, and destruction. The chosen man was not imprisoned, but revered. He was bathed, perfumed, and dressed in rich cotton garments. Nobles bowed before him. Children greeted him with flowers. The city saw him not as a man, but as divinity made flesh. He was taught music, poetry, and the art of speaking with grace. Wherever he walked, the crowd parted. Wherever he looked, silence followed. He lived in luxury, but not in freedom. For every comfort came with the shadow of doom. He knew that when the year ended, so too would his life. And yet he smiled. To die as the embodiment of a god was the greatest honor an Aztec could imagine. His body was temporary, his role was eternal. As the final days of his divine year approached, the priests gave him 4 women, each chosen to embody one of the goddesses of creation: Shilanan, the tender spirit of young maize; Xochiquetzal, goddess of love and beauty; Atlatlonan, the goddess of rivers; and Huixtoshiat, patroness of salt and purification. These women were not his companions, but his final reflections of the world's pleasures, life's last gift before sacrifice. For 20 days, the god-man lived among them in a palace scented with copal and flowers. Music drifted through the halls, and at night, torches glowed like stars upon the walls. The city below whispered of his fortune, his beauty, his impending death. To the Aztecs, this was not cruelty, but poetry. The perfect man, adorned with love and music, ascending to meet the gods through death. When the day of Toxcat dawned, he was adorned one last time. His body was painted black, and his hair crowned with white feathers. He was given a flute carved from bone, a symbol of the voice that would soon fall silent. As he walked through the city, he broke the flute in pieces, one at each corner of the street, marking his farewell to the world. The people wept and sang as he passed, knowing he was walking toward the knife. At the foot of the Great Pyramid, he climbed the steps without resistance. His 4 lovers followed him, veiled in white. They did not cry. To weep was to insult the gods. When he reached the summit, he lay upon the stone altar, his heart steady, his gaze lifted toward the sun that burned above him. The high priest raised the obsidian blade, sharp as truth, dark as fate, and in a single motion pierced his chest. As his heart was lifted toward the sky, the drums thundered. The crowd below fell to their knees. Blood spilled over the altar, and with it, they believed, flowed the strength that kept the sun alive. But his death did not end his story. His body, still warm, was carried to the temple of Tezcatlipoca, where his 4 lovers awaited him. They too would soon join him in death, following their divine consort into eternity. To the Aztecs, love and death were not enemies, but twins, inseparable, eternal. This ritual horrified the Spanish chroniclers who later wrote of it. Yet to the Aztecs it was beauty fulfilled. For what could be purer than a life lived in joy, discipline, and grace, and then offered whole to the gods? The sacrificial lover was not a victim. He was the living proof that pleasure and pain, creation and destruction were merely phases of the same cosmic rhythm. And so, year after year, under the blazing sun, another man ascended the steps, another heart was raised to the sky, and another song was born, the hymn of love's final surrender to eternity. For in the Aztec world, to be loved by the gods was to be consumed by them.
If the sacrificial man embodied the fleeting glory of life, then the sacrificial woman embodied its eternal surrender. Among the Aztecs, the most beautiful and haunting ritual of all was the one dedicated to Xochiquetzal, the goddess of love, flowers, beauty, and feminine power. She was the divine mother of all pleasures and passions, yet also the patroness of weaving and childbirth, the tender and the terrible entwine. Once a year, during the festival that bore her name, the priests sought a mortal woman worthy of representing the goddess herself. She had to be pure, graceful, and radiant, untouched by sin, her body as perfect as her spirit was obedient. When the chosen girl was found, she was not taken by force, but by reverence. The people bowed as she passed, calling her Ixochitl Inquicat, flower and song, the living incarnation of divine beauty. For a time her life was paradise. She was adorned with the finest garments, her hair woven with flowers, her skin perfumed with oils. She lived surrounded by music and laughter, her every wish granted. In the eyes of the people, she was not human, but divine, the goddess walking among them. But the Aztecs never forgot the cruel truth that beauty and death were bound by the same thread. As her festival approached, she was wed, not to a man of her choosing, but to a warrior who represented Tezcatlipoca, the god of fate and reflection. Their marriage was symbolic, a reenactment of cosmic union, creation through love, destruction through sacrifice. They lived together for 1 year, feasting, singing, and sleeping beneath the gaze of the gods. To them, it was not love as mortals understood it, but the sacred reenactment of divine desire. Yet both bride and husband knew their destiny. When the appointed day arrived, the city held its breath. The girl, dressed in a robe of brilliant yellow, the color of the sun's final light, was led to the temple. Her husband, the living embodiment of a god, stood beside her in solemn silence. The air thickened with incense, drums, and the low hum of 1,000 prayers. Some chroniclers wrote that she was slain upon the altar, her heart torn out as an offering to Xochiquetzal herself. Others whispered of a more terrible fate, that she was skinned alive and her flesh worn by a priest who took on her identity, weaving at the loom while worshippers danced and pierced their tongues in penance. The sight was meant to honor the goddess's eternal renewal, beauty dying only to be reborn in ritual form. And there were darker versions still, spoken in hushed tones even among the faithful. In these, the Virgin was first given to the Tlatoni, the ruler, the earthly voice of the gods, to taste mortal pleasure before her death. Her purity, once divine, was thus transformed into sacrifice, the merging of sin and sanctity,
echoing the goddess's own paradox. Whatever the truth, one image remains unshakable. The woman, serene and unresisting, accepting her fate not as victim, but as an offering. Her death was not punishment, but perfection. The Aztecs believed that through her suffering, Xochiquetzal's beauty was renewed, her flowers blossomed again, and life was restored to the earth. It was said that as the priest donned her skin and sat at the loom, he began to weave threads of white and crimson, the colors of purity and blood. Around him, his followers danced in ecstasy and pain, piercing their tongues and ears, offering drops of their own blood to honor the goddess who died and lived eternally. The Spanish missionaries who later recorded these rites saw only barbarity, but to the Aztecs it was transcendence. The circle of creation made visible, the marriage of love and death brought to life before their eyes. They believed that nothing divine could exist without sacrifice, and nothing beautiful could endure without pain. To be chosen as the bride of the gods was both blessing and curse. She was adored, exalted, and destroyed, the living metaphor of the Aztec world itself, radiant, disciplined, and doomed. When her heart stopped beating, the drums echoed like thunder, and the people cried out, not in horror, but in worship. For they believed that as her blood touched the earth, flowers would bloom where she fell, bright and fragrant, eternal as the goddess who claimed her. In that final breath, beauty returned to the soil, and the cycle began anew. When the last drumbeat faded and the fires on the pyramids dimmed, the Aztecs stood before the silence they had created, a silence filled with meaning. Their world was built upon the conviction that life was only possible through sacrifice, that creation demanded destruction, and that beauty without suffering was hollow. To them, blood was not horror, it was the music of existence. The Spanish conquerors would later write of them as monsters, people who tore hearts from living bodies and worshipped death. But the truth, seen through Aztec eyes, was far more complicated. Death was never an end, it was an exchange. The gods had bled first. Humanity merely paid its debt in return. Every drop of blood, every life surrendered upon the stone altar was a promise that the sun would rise again, that flowers would bloom, that rain would return. Even desire was sacred. To love, to lust, to weep, all these were seen as forms of offering. The body itself was a temple of sacrifice, capable of both creation and ruin. A husband's fidelity, a warrior's courage, a mother's labor, each was a form of worship. Pleasure was not indulgence, but an acknowledgement of the divine spark in all living things. The Aztecs did not separate holiness from the flesh. They saw the divine within it. The gods themselves were passionate, jealous, and flawed. They loved and killed, created and devoured. Humanity was their reflection, imperfect, trembling, and radiant with the same fire. In the poetry left behind, their worldview becomes painfully clear. One song, preserved from the city of Texcoco, mourns, "We are the tears of the gods, the breath of their sorrow. We bloom to fade and fade to feed them. Our hearts are their music, our blood their wine." This was the essence of Aztec life, not cruelty, but reciprocity. A civilization obsessed not with death,
but with the continuity of existence. Every law, every ritual, every act of love and punishment was aimed at maintaining that fragile balance between the sacred and the mortal. To live in such a world was to exist in constant awareness that joy could turn to grief, that beauty carried the seed of decay, that every act of love risked destruction. Yet within that awareness was a strange serenity, for the Aztecs knew what few societies have ever accepted, that the price of existence is loss, and the only true immortality lies in giving oneself completely to the cycle. Even their flowers, symbols of tenderness and transience, reflected this truth. They were placed on altars, woven into warriors' hair, and scattered over the bodies of the dead. The Aztecs called them the songs of the earth, ephemeral, fragrant, and destined to die beautifully. In that fragile bloom lay their entire philosophy: to live vividly, to love fiercely, and to die willingly so that life could begin again. When the Spanish destroyed their temples and silenced their drums, they believed they had ended a civilization of darkness, but they could not destroy the idea that pulsed beneath it, the belief that life and death, like the sun and the moon, are two halves of the same eternal heartbeat. And so, even centuries later, when the ruins of Tenochtitlan lie buried beneath the streets of modern Mexico City, the spirit of the Aztecs endures. In the music, the festivals, the flowers offered to the dead, there lingers that ancient whisper: everything beautiful must die, and everything that dies shall bloom again. Their gods are gone, their empire dust, but their philosophy remains, carved into the soul of humanity. Because the Aztecs, more than most, understood that eternity is not found in the heavens. It is written in blood, sung in the wind, and reborn each morning with the rising sun.